Okay, we're back again, and let's take a look here. All right. So, what we're doing with continuing on with our fact-finding technique discussion is that we are moving on to the next topic about observing the organization and operation. And actually, one thing that I need to say is I said that the questionnaire survey is coming in after this one. It's actually the last one. It's actually the fifth one. I was mistaken on the order, but so this one is interesting because if we have the time and availability to do this, it can be quite useful. Okay. So the idea is that we can have people who, what they will do is they will go to our organization that we're working for, our customer, whatever, and they will watch the organization work in action and take notes and keep an idea of what's going on. So think about before the ATM existed. Now, I know that none of you are old enough to remember a time before the ATM existed at a bank. But there was a time where there was no automated teller machine. There was no ATM. In order to get money out of the bank, in order to pay a bill, in order to put money into the bank, you'd have to go to the bank, you'd have to wait in line, you would have to talk to a person. Long time ago, I know. All right. But when the first ATM came around, when they were developing it, one of the things that probably happened was the developers of the technology, developers of the system, would go to the bank, and they wouldn't be there to act as a customer, but what they would do is they would just watch. They would watch customers come in and would say, okay, how do they do this? Well, they provide their ID. They're Kimlik, right? They provide their ID, their identification. They request a certain amount of money. They have a certain amount of money they want to put in. They tell the teller what bank account the bank account number is. Yeah, okay. So there's and so you think about one of the things that probably came out of that was the discussion of how do we identify the customer, right? How do we identify the bank customer in this? Because if I'm walking up to a teller, I can provide them my Kimlik, I can provide them my identity card, but if I'm going to need to go to an automated teller, a computer to get money out, well, how do I tell it that that's who I am? And someone came up with the idea for using these plastic cards, right? That they could stick the card into the machine, right? And then put in a PIN, a 4-digit PIN, and that somehow confirmed that you were who you said you were, that you owned that account. All right. And what did they do? They sat there and they watched. This is how this system operates. Right? And so that can be very helpful. And what we'll see here in the advantages and disadvantages is one of the advantages is that the whole relatively inexpensive, the cost factor. We're not taking people away from their job, right? So in an interview, for me to interview an employee for a company, I've got to take them away from their job, got to take them away from doing work so that I can ask them questions about their job. But here, if I'm observing them doing their job, guess what? They are doing their job while I'm watching. So I'm not costing my customer, the company I'm working for and making this system for, I'm not costing them anything. Right? Some of the advantages, it can allow for the validity of facts to be checked. So just because someone says that the system operates a certain way or that there's certain problems or whatever, doesn't always mean that they are accurately reporting. Right? We don't always accurately report things. All right, so we can observe and verify, yes, that is actually how it works. Okay. We can see more exactly what is being done. I mean, I've had many jobs where if they were to ask me, how do you do your job in this way? So when I was younger, much younger, I worked for a fast food restaurant, right? And if they asked me how to make a sandwich or a burger or whatever, I could tell you how to, but an observer can actually see how it's being done. They can say, oh, so they do this and then they do that. Right? Whereas many employees may not be able to tell you exactly how it's done because they I just don't know. I just throw it on there and I just throw the mustard and the ketchup and it's done. It's like, but how do you do that? All right. Okay. Let's see. Some of the disadvantages, though, right, is people may knowingly or unknowingly perform differently when they know they're being observed. So let's say that I know that somebody's watching me. Let's say that I was teaching this class right now and I knew that Meli Hoja was watching, right? Maybe he's watching secretively. Maybe he's actually signed in as one of you. Maybe, let's see, the first name up here on my screen, Suleiman. Yeah. Maybe what if Suleiman is actually Meli Hoja logged in and watching me teach this class, right? Well, if I knew that he was watching me teach this class, I might teach differently, huh? If your boss is watching, right? Or if, just anybody's watching, I might perform tasks differently, right? Sometimes we do it without knowing it, right? Sometimes we do things differently because someone's watching without knowing it. In fact, this was a question that came up in my one of my other classes. We were talking about research, and one of the students, their master's thesis was about using video, like recording people walking so that they could see if they could identify people based on the way that they walk. Well, and I asked the question, I said, well, did you guys think about whether people might walk differently if they knew that they were being recorded? And of course, the person said, "Yeah, we talked about that. And we tried to figure out, okay, how can we make sure that they always walk however they would normally walk, right? Because there is something about us as humans that when we know someone's watching, when we know someone's aware of us, watching us do things, that we do them differently, all right? May miss tasks of a certain level of difficulty or volume, normally period of time. The example I often give about this is, so my mom does taxes. She does what's called taxes. So in America, we don't have this here in Turkey, but in America, we have what's called a tax return, which throughout the year you pay taxes, and at the end of the year, if you've paid too much in taxes, the government gives you the money back. Okay, and if you haven't paid enough in taxes, you're given an opportunity to pay what you did not pay, what you should have paid throughout the year, right? Well, there are people like my mom who their job is to basically take someone's income, take their all their information and other things, and figure out, did they pay enough tax? Okay, and they submit it to the government and do all this stuff. So that's her job. Okay, well, the way that the American system works is I get paid. So if I were an employee in America, I would get paid from January 1st to December 31st, a certain amount. My company then would have like 2 weeks, like until the second week of January or something of the next year, to give me a list of all the income they've given me, all the tax I've paid, and all these other different pieces of information. And I bring it to someone like my mom, who then does all the taxes stuff, does what she knows how to do, and I have no clue how to do. And she has until April 15th to submit this to the government so they can figure out whether or not I have to pay or if they have to pay me. Okay, so you can imagine from the second week of January, when everybody gets these documents telling them what their income was and other information, until April 15th, the second week of April, that's 3 months. That's 3 months that everybody in America has to be able to report their taxes, get someone who knows what they're doing, like my mom, to report their taxes to the government. My mom is very, very busy for those 3 months, right? She is working a lot during those 3 months. She doesn't work a whole lot. She works, but she doesn't work a whole lot the other 9 months of the year, right? Why? Because that's not the busy time for her. And the reason I use this as an example is, imagine if I was creating something of a tax database for someone like my mom's company. And if I said, I'm going to go watch them, I'm going to go watch them in August, and I'm going to see how they operate, I will get a very different picture of how they operate than if I were to go observe them in, say, March, right? So the timing of the year is important. But what if I don't really have the people to be able to have them go watch during March? Well, see, that could be a problem, right? So if we choose wisely when we go observe the company or the organization that we're trying to make something for, then we can catch a lot of the busy stuff, a lot of the important stuff that they'll be doing. If we choose unwisely, then we may miss out on a lot of the tasks that they do. Okay. Some tasks may not always be performed in the same manner in which they are observed. There could be lots of different ways to do the same task, and we may get the idea that the way that we saw it done one time is the way that it must be done every time. Okay. So for example, I teach, you guys know this, I teach the Intro to Programming class 101, 102. I'm a big fan of the JGrasp IDE for Java. That's what I use. If someone were to observe me write some Java code, they may get the wrong idea that JGrasp is the only tool to write Java code with, right? There are lots of other tools. There are lots of other IDEs, right? And so, yeah, so observing, we need to make sure that not only do we observe at a good time, we need to observe a good different people who operate in the same organization. Okay, so that's how observing. Now research is probably the one that you are going to use primarily for this group project coming up. Okay, it's basically, well, research and documentation as well, but what you're going to do is you're going to go out there and you're going to find the application. You're going to find information related to the application and the problem you're trying to solve. You could be looking into journals, books, conference papers, other internet, right? So for many of you, for coding, you've used websites like Stack Overflow, right? Stack Overflow is great for helping us to understand how to do certain things. Unfortunately, many people try to just use the solutions provided on Stack Overflow, which can be a problem because oftentimes the solutions can help us get an idea. The solutions that are existing on Stack Overflow can help us get an idea of how something can be solved, but it doesn't always solve the exact problem we're looking at. Okay, but that's the whole point of this third bullet, is we can get information on how others have solved similar problems, right? So for example, if I were to say, I want to find a certain, like if I were in a Java program and I wanted to find a certain character in a string, right, for a Java program, I might say, well, okay, well, I'm going to write a loop and I'm going to loop through character by character until I find the character and all this, right? Or I could find out that Java has the index of method, right? Research might help me find out that there exists a software package or some software solution that already exists to solve the problem that I'm currently looking at. Okay, so research can help us in that way. Right. Some advantages: if the solution already exists, we can use it. Right. Now, we also do need to know that if a similar problem might have a similar solution, but we do need to know how the differences how the differences in the problem make the solution different as well. Okay. It also has an advantage of it keeps me as the researcher up to date with current developments, what's called state of the art. So there may be new new systems and new solutions to problems that I haven't thought of, that I have not kept up with. Researching things can help me keep up to date with those things. Okay. Some disadvantages: we may need specific access to certain types of information. So for like journal papers and articles and conference papers, if we don't have access to the IEEE store or to the web store or to what's the other one? Can't think of IEEE Explore and anyway, there's some that different universities have access to that if I'm not a member of that university, I may not be able to gain access to certain papers, right? You know, it may ultimately, we may spend a lot of time trying to research a problem, and that problem may not have been solved or documented, or the solution may not be documented somewhere. And so we may spend a lot of time trying to research a solution to a problem, only to find out that the solution is not out there and we have to develop it ourselves. Okay, so those are some advantages and disadvantages of research. Questionnaires are similar to interviews, and just like with interviews where we have the open-ended and closed-ended questions, we can have free format and fixed format questions, right? Questionnaires, one of the nice things is that we can send out the same questions to lots of people all at once, right? So we don't have to take someone's time to do the interviewing. We don't have to take someone else's time to be the interviewee. We can just take these questionnaires, send them out to people, and have them respond back to us. Yeah, so it doesn't take as much time that way. All right. One of the nice things is people can complete and return them at their convenience. In an interview, I've got to take them away at a certain time and say, you have to come here, and it's when I'm available to ask you questions is when you need to be available for me to ask you those questions. With a questionnaire, whenever they're ready to return them, you know what, they don't want to do it right now, they can do it another time. All right. It's pretty inexpensive that we can send them out, especially in today's digital age, where we can send them out as a Google form or as a Microsoft form, or in the OBS system. There's a questionnaire there as well for the end of the semester. Hopefully people are likely to provide real facts since they'll be kept confidential. So in OBS, for example, when you answer those questions about my job performance, about my teaching performance, or about the course itself, I don't see who answered what. Okay, so I don't know what you answered, right? And so it's confidential. So hopefully you can be more honest and more open with what you really think about the class and about me as a teacher. Okay. Especially as far as any type of like multiple choice or value question, like a not open-ended question, we can tabulate and analyze answers very quickly. So like if someone says, you know, if it's a rate on the scale of 1 to 10, these different things, we can have a quick analysis of what the median, mean, and standard deviation are of those responses. Hold on a second. All right. Now, as we said over and over again, advantages come with disadvantages too. Number of respondents can be low, especially if, like, so who was it? Or mentioned mandatory, the interviewing being mandatory. Your OBS questionnaires are also mandatory, so we always get 100% return on that, but it's not always the case, right? What you want is you would prefer to be able to make the questionnaires not mandatory so that you would feel like you would got some honest answers, right? But making it mandatory means we get a high turnout, right? Questionnaires may be returned incomplete. This especially is important. Like one of the questions I always bring up with you guys is that one about additional comments, like any text-based question, where some of you write stuff like dot ASD, ASDF, some of you take the time to write the word none, but those are very not helpful, right? Those are not helpful answers to the question of additional questions or comments, right? Why? Because if I'm gonna become a better teacher, right, I need to know, what is it about the class that you liked? What is it about the class that you didn't like? What was it about the class that helped you learn something? What could I do differently that would help you learn this material better, right? And so responses like ... don't help me with that. But I know that it's a required field because everyone types something. So try to complete those, right? But that is a disadvantage, is that things may be returned incomplete. And I would call that as an incomplete return, is that it did not answer the question that was being asked. Okay? So we may not provide to reword the questions. So if, let's say, someone answering it does not understand what the question is asking, then there's no chance to be able to change the wording, right? So that we can help them understand the question better, right? And finally, we cannot observe the respondent's body language. That example I gave earlier, where it was like, yeah, it's great, I love it. Oh, yeah, it's great, I love it. That whole difference in body language, we cannot see that in a questionnaire, right? We cannot see the difference in body language. All right, so this is an example, a worked example where we might look at some documentation. Unfortunately, the documentation is really the only thing that we can show an example for. Obviously, I guess you could show an example of a questionnaire, although you've seen an example of a questionnaire through the OBS system. Research, you guys know how to do research. You just do some Google searching and stuff like that. Interviews, we can't show an example of an interview here, but we can show an example of documentation. Right? So here we notice that some different fields, some different data items that might exist: a staff number, a person's name, sex, date of birth, what position are they, what is their salary, right? What branch number and branch address will they work out? So these are all data that we're going to maintain, right? Notice here you have the branch. Okay, so branch is going to have multiple staff at it. Okay, that's good to know. All right, so that's some stuff that we may need to know here. Some property information, how we might analyze, okay, what are some of the fields that would exist? What are some of the attributes that we will have here? Right? All these different things will become attributes. All right. So these are some different documentation we might look at. We might also look at the mission statement for our DREAMHOME database system. one thing I'm going to point out here, so the purpose of the DREAMHOME database system is to maintain the data that is used and generated to support the property rentals business for our clients and property owners, and to facilitate the cooperation and sharing of information between branches. Okay. Now, one thing is look for nouns. Nouns will typically become tables. Nouns in a mission statement will become tables, most likely. So clients, okay, so we'll probably have a client table. Property owners, so we'll probably have an owner table. Information between branches, so branches will become a branch table. Property, now owners would become a table, but property maybe too, right? Now, the mission statement's not going to include all the tables that we end up having to create, but it will give us an idea of some of the main tables that we need to have. Okay. All right. So we might say, okay, we need to maintain data on all these different things, on branches and staff and properties. Notice that some of these things, branches, staff, clients, property owners, these are all things that came from the mission statement or those forms that we looked at, the documentation that we looked at. All right. So we're going to need to maintain data on all these things. We're going to perform searches on all of these things. We're going to have reports on all these things. We're going to track the status of certain things as well. And this is all going, we were able to learn this information from the mission statement and from those documents that we looked at, those forms. One thing that we will need to be aware of is what our system's boundary is. So one thing, for example, is staff, right? Staff gets a salary from payroll, from the payroll system, but that's not really what our focus is it? We're mostly concerned with property rentals, property advertising, and customer services and staff. This is what we're mainly, so inside of this gray box is mostly what we are concerned with. We acknowledge that there are other things outside of this that may impact our system, but we are not in charge of developing the stuff related to that. So another good example here is property sales, right? So property might be sold from one client to another, from from one property owner to another. But our system here, this DREAMHOME system, is not about selling property, it's about renting property. So we do need to know, who owns the property, right? So property sales is important to our system, but we are not in charge of designing that system. We are not going to be handling the selling of property. We're only going to be handling the renting of property. Okay, so making sure that we stay inside of the system that we are developing. All right. So then what we'll do is we'll figure out, okay, what type of access will we need for different information? So take, for example, the branches, they'll need to maintain, query, or report on different things. Now, query and report are going to be similar things here. All right. But a manager, so a director over the whole thing, over the whole DREAMHOME system, right, multiple branches, might need to be able to query and report on multiple branches, but a manager is going to need to be able to maintain, so change, update, right, a single branch because they are the manager of that branch. Right? So some of the different types of data and who, what role needs to be able to have certain types of access to it. Now, this is large and confusing and really fine. Like this is really nuanced and really getting into the finer details of how access will be done. Usually something like this will be just fine, where we say, okay, I'm going to have a branch table, and these are the guys that are going to need to be able to have certain access to that information, right? A supervisor will also need to be able to access the staff information. Now notice one thing, if you get down here, having a higher position in the organization like the director or the manager doesn't always mean that you have access to everything, even the lowers also do. Okay? So like the property viewing, manager doesn't need to be involved in the viewing of the property and how the property is viewed and who viewed it and what their comments were. Manager needs to delegate that to other people, the supervisor, assistant, stuff like that. Okay, so just because they have a higher position doesn't mean they automatically have access to things that people below them have access to. It means that there are things that they need access to be able to do their job well. Okay, and that's one of the things that we're doing with this, and this is this more nuanced version, is saying, okay, who needs access to what, and let's make sure that we give the type of access that's most appropriate to be able to let people do their job well. Okay? All right, so our 5 types of fact-finding techniques. Let me go back to the slide. There are 5 types of fact-finding techniques that we talked about: examining documentation, interviewing, observing the organization, research, and questionnaires. All right. So I imagine that most of you for your group project will do a lot of research and examining documentation of existing systems. Right. If you have the opportunity to interview or do questionnaires or even observe an organization and operation, take advantage of that. If the type of system that you want to develop, if you have a friend or a relative who works in one of those organizations, one of those types of organizations, yeah, do it, right? Take advantage of that. But I imagine that for most of you, you're going to be examining documentation and doing research. Okay, so what I would suggest is that you use this first week, now that you have that assignment assigned, is to go ahead and start compiling your list of data items that you want to track. What's important, all right? So start analyzing your system. All right. Any questions or comments?
Hocam, I have a question, but it's not direct about course.
Okay.
In a web programming course, we need to design system, and maybe Hoca wants from us some kind of requirements and use case analysis. Do you have any tips about use case and requirement analysis?
Well, use case analysis should just be basically a set of how the system will be used. So the actor, which could be a person, which oftentimes is a person, a user or something, but it could be something, it could be another software system. But it's how the actor will act onto the system, like what will they do? So like the ATM example that I keep coming back to, a use case analysis of a use case example for me using the ATM would be user puts their card in. You kind of step out what's going to happen. User puts their card in. User gets prompted put their PIN. They put their PIN. They type, they press the button for what is it, Pada checkmate. They type 100 Giddish. Then what's the result? 100 lira comes out of the of the slot. Card is returned. And then it's just basically how does it progress in a typical use. A good use case analysis it's like a flow chart. A good use case analysis won't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to have like every possible flow, every possible if statement and all that stuff, but it should include both the typical use of how something's going to be done and any possible error conditions. So a good use case analysis of the visiting the ATM should include what happens if the user puts the wrong PIN in. All right, something like that.
Requirements is minimum function or smallest function in the system, right? Am I wrong?
It's not about the smallest or the minimal function. It's kind of detailing all of the needs of what the customer needs. So, so it would say, okay, what is required for,
login, for example.
For what
Can
now?
we say login operation? Is it requirements?
Right. You would want to say what is the requirement. So a requirement might say, okay. Okay, it could be something like as far as logging in, it could be the system needs to have a way to authenticate a user, right? Now, that doesn't tell you, are they going to have a username and a password, or are they going to use their fingerprint? It doesn't tell you that, but it does say it needs to have a way to verify and authenticate users.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. Other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We're going to end a little bit early, just a couple minutes early, and we're actually done. We're done with the fact-finding techniques discussion, which is great because then we get into ER modeling tomorrow, which I'm glad we're getting to an early start on ER modeling because it is a longer topic, and so but it's a very important one. So we'll do ER modeling tomorrow, and I'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 8:30. All right. Have a good afternoon, and see you then.